Hello Aid Explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another exciting and informative video on our YouTube channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we want to thank you for watching. In today's episode, we are digging deep into why the aid sent to Africa is dead, why aid is not working in the continent of Africa, and how there is a better way for Africa to move forward. In this episode, I'll be able to dive into Dambisa Moyo, a world-class analyst who was able to review the reason why aid does not work in the continent. So without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it. As the global financial crisis unfolds, those least responsible, our world's poor, will be most affected, and high inflation around the world in most developed countries and those emerging economies. Many have called upon the developed countries to support and uphold campaigns to commitment and also double their foreign assistance in different aspects that this could shove and also support emerging economies from coming out from poverty. However, others experts see it differently. Dambisa Moyo, in her book written Dead Aid, challenges the world and Africa in particular to think again with regards to aid. Although we all can agree that ending poverty is an urgent necessity, there appears to be increased disagreement about the best way to achieve this particular goal around the world. Born and raised in Lusaka, Zambia, Mayo has spent the past couple of years at Goldman Sachs as head of economic research and strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, and before that as a consultant at World Bank with a PhD in economics from Oxford University and a master's degree from Harvard University John F. Kennedy's School of Government. She is more than qualified than anyone around the world to talk about this specific subject. In her third aid, Mayo comes out with guns and blazing against the aid industry, calling it is not just effective and ineffective actually, but malign in her own words. Despite more than $1 trillion in developing aid given to Africa in the past 50 years, she argues that the aid has failed to deliver sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction and has actually made the continent worse off in several areas, despite some countries picking up really well in the past couple of years. To remedy this situation, according to Mayo, presents a roadmap for Africa to wend off aid over the next couple of years and offers a menu of alternatives means of financing development and growth in several areas. If you consider Mayo's perspective, Mayo opens her case by writing between 1970 and 1998, when aid flows to Africa were at their peak, poverty in Africa rose from 11% to a staggering 66% at the time. Today, Africa is the only continent where life expectancy is less than 60 years. Sub-Saharan Africa remains the poorest region in the world, where literacy, health, and other social indicators have plummeted since the 1970s based on our own assessment.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You claim that the peoples of Africa are getting poorer because we give them more money in aid. How is that possible?
I ask myself that same question. It's been 60 years, over $1 trillion has gone to Africa. But if you look at growth and if you look at poverty, it's getting worse. Right now, over 60% of Africa is under the age of 24. Many Africans don't have job prospects. The political instability across the continent has not reduced. In 1970s, 10% of the population lived in dire poverty. It's now over 70% of the population that's living in dire poverty. And aid, unfortunately, brings in a lot of negative incentives. The governments behave badly, it discourages investment and entrepreneurship, and it disenfranchises Africans. So very often across the African continent, Africans are not able to hold their governments accountable for bad behavior.
But are you talking about all sorts of aid, or is it just bilateral state-to-state aid?
That's a very good question. There are basically three types of aid. There's humanitarian or emergency aid, and I think we should, as a global community, intervene when when we see such tragedies as tsunami or earthquake. So I'm not talking about that type of aid. I'm also not talking about charitable aid, things like sending money for a scholarship. That's quite small money. I'm talking about the big...
you don't criticize?
Well, they have problems, don't get me wrong. And ultimately, we want a society where Africans don't have to rely on NGOs to provide schools and healthcare, roads and security. We want Africa to stand on its own as an equal partner on the global stage. And charitable aid, and in fact, not only NGOs, but government-to-government aid, which is what I'm criticizing, cannot deliver a situation where Africa can become an equal partner on the global stage.
So what should we do?
There are lots of things we can do. At the government level, we should be encouraging trade. We should be encouraging African governments to get off of aid and start to look for alternative ways of financing development, such as foreign direct investment, accessing the capital markets, through remittances. And on the individual level, we can support African entrepreneurs through microfinance, for example. So instead
like
of
the Grameen Bank.
Exactly. Instead of giving money to governments, you give money to individual African entrepreneurs. So, for example, a shoemaker in Kenya or a farmer in Ghana and so on. And there are ways to actually do that without the money going towards the government.
But why do you find it so wrong that celebrities like Bono does this charity work for Africa?
Bono has become, unfortunately, not just Bono, but the celebrity culture. Exactly. They've become the face of Africa. And yet, Africans stand in the hot African sun, like many places around the world, to elect our leaders. So we as Africans and the global community should expect to hear from the African governments what they plan to do with regards to poverty in Africa. We don't want to hear the message coming from celebrities, especially since the message is very negative. They only focus on war, disease, corruption, and poverty. There are some bright spots in Africa. The message that these celebrities are carrying is not a message that can make Africans raise engineers and doctors and teachers and artists across the continent. It's a very negative message. It is not helping. It is the wrong message. We want to hear from African leaders. African leaders need to be incentivized so that they stand up and start to explain what their plan is for Africa's future.
It guarantees that social capital remains weak and countries poor. And Mayo's list of aid since goes on, including the crowding out of domestic exports and also raising the stake for conflict in different areas. So what does Mayo proposes at the moment? In her own version of shocking therapy, she asks, what if one by one African countries are received a phone call telling them that in exactly 5 years' time, the aid tap is going to be shut off permanently? The shock will force them to also think and become creative and economic plans and phase out alternative financial mechanisms, and aid is planned out in gains. In thinking a different way, those new financial mechanisms should include increased trade participation among African nations with emerging markets like China, India, and Brazil, foreign direct investment entrance into the international capital market, and increase domestic and savings through remittance and microfinance. The end goal is to phase reliance on aid down to about 5% or less within the next couple of years. Sound impossible? Moyo doesn't think so. Implementing this plan will be dealt very easily and claims, but will require political will. This political will, Moyo argues, must be rallied by Western activities, for they are the only ones with the ability and also incentive to drive changes. It is, after all, their money being poured down the drain. She is not the first to call for the move away from dependency, although she may be the first person to point out really hard on this topic. Mayo has only proven correlations, not causations, although we can't be sure how her prescriptions will hold up in the face of global recession and economic inflation. She challenges the world, and Africa in particular, to think before we act. Mayo expands the boundaries of the development conversation, one that has become more and more vibrant and more menacing in recent months. Therefore, in different areas, those of us rethinking aid can call on agree that time has come for deeper and more direct involvement of Africans in setting their own development courses. As the African proverb goes, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Let us all not waste any time in the continent. Africa moment and Africa is now. In the words of the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, who actually elaborate and expand with regards to aid in the continent of Africa.
Allow me the privilege to be unconventional in this discussion. You started with a very provocative question, which really was, I think, intended to have us thinking beyond what we are used to. And in this case, I think the panelists have gone along the lines of things we are used to. And I start with the point you made when you were asking the question of preference between the markets and the aid. And I think there was grossing over the problem, and people saying, you see, we need both, and it was as if there was none that was better than the other, and so on and so forth. This is a blunder. Number one, first of all, this question can only be asked in Africa, not in any other region of this world. Which in itself tells you that there is something wrong even with the way people are arguing the case. Because it is now a given that aid and capital markets, are the same. You see, it's not, you can't say you don't need this. I mean, first, aid is more political than anything else. Markets are less political, markets are neutral. Look at the rest of the world. The only thing you're talking about, why you highlight aid, sometimes that to the point that if you say anything about aid, it may be used against you. You see, this is the only place we can be having this conversation. All kinds of wealth lying all over the place from Africa and being recycled to us in the form of aid and then in the end telling you, you must be humble, you must keep quiet. Don't say some of these things.
We want to thank you for watching. Hopefully we've informed you with regards to the complexities surrounding aid. We are looking forward to meeting you in the next episode. If you are joining our channel for the first time, we encourage you to check other videos on our YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.